Hi, Woody.
Hi, Tammy.
Good morning to you. Good afternoon for me.
Right, I was going to say right over. Yes, back at you.
Um, I'm so happy that we're sitting here today together, two different places, but together. And thank
Yeah,
you for coming.
yeah, thanks
Um,
for
I want to start right off with a little, very short quote from a text that I'm working with these days. And it says, "In a call to farms in the shadow of, we do not dare to think it." And you wrote it in a booklet, a text that is called A Call to Farms. And we translated it, and these days I'm bringing it to print. So much more work than I expected it to be.
I
And
pity you. I pity you.
and I actually want to reach this text later in the conversation. I want to start in another text, maybe the first one that you wrote that started this movement that I'm now part of, as I am part of משקיעים באדמה, a branch of it in Israel.
Mhm.
And we are talking in the shadow of the unspeakable, maybe, or the unbearable, or the shadow is maybe even bigger than what you thought when you wrote those words, and maybe bigger than what you thought or dared to imagine when you wrote the first book, Slow Money. Inquiries into the nature of slow money, investing in food farms and fertility, as if investing as if food farms and fertility mattered. So in this shadow of what is happening against the land and the people in many places in the world right now, but including Ukraine and including Palestine, here we are talking. Um, yes, so we will start with slow money because that's I think where the story starts, and it's the first time maybe we're exposing you to the Israeli listeners or followers of Slow Money Israel, משקיעים באדמה, Slow Money Israel. You came to it after maybe 40 years of being in finance. So you're not a hippie. Tell me a little bit about.
Well, my daughter wouldn't entirely agree with you on that. Maybe we can get back to that later. Um, no, but wait, before we dive in, since you started out with that little mention of the shadow, uh, so I don't think of it as just the shadow of, let's say, uh, immediate armed conflict and immediate crisis. I mean, it is that, obviously. I mean, but I now this might sound a little, how we would say in the United States, airy fairy, um, meaning not that serious or tangible or something to someone.
Exposing you as a hippie.
No, not that. It's very hard for me talking to someone in Israel, knowing how just traumatic everything, not knowing, but imagining how horrible it must be to be there. So yeah, I'll do the best I can to just kind of talk from the heart and knowing that I can't really be there. I'm not really there. But like you said, we're all together. So the shadow, to me, is the shadow of 250-year-old economic thinking that made sense when corporations were small and the world was big, and there was only, let's say, 500 million people on the planet, or even a billion people on the planet. And now here we are 300 years later, and I'm not going to, I don't think people need the statistics other than that population is 8 billion and parts per million in the atmosphere is blank, and et cetera, et cetera. So the circumstances have completely changed. In a sense, due to the success of that economic thinking, that's what enabled it. It fueled all this growth. Um, not just that economic thinking, but it played a big role in it, as kind of partners in crime, if you want to say that, with partners in non-crime, with technology and computers and cars and all these things. And everything kind of came through this kind of funnel, and we had huge economic growth. So the shadow we're in is the shadow of Adam Smith's invisible hand, which anybody who knows about economics has heard ad infinitum, ad nauseum, I should say, that the invisible hand this, the invisible hand that.
Before we started to record, we talked about. I mean, you read something you wrote about invisibility. So that also is already echoing this invisible, that this, like something is happening that is invisible, so invisible that for 50 years we already know about it, but we can't really do anything about it because it keeps being somehow invisible.
Right. I mean, there's the invisibility of, let's say, parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere, or microplastics, or, you know, so there's all that kind of stuff. There's the invisibility of nuclear proliferation. Talk about shadows. That is the shadow that I was referring to in Call to Farms. So,
yes.
But the other invisibility is this invisible hand.
The invisibility of money.
This ideology that says everybody buying low and selling high and seeking to maximize their personal gain will inevitably lead to the good of all. I mean, and no one would ever have said it was perfect, but you know, perfect is the enemy of the good. So people, a lot of very smart, well-intentioned, hardworking people who believe that socialism and communism are the devil, and therefore, whatever the flaws of capitalism are, it's a heck of a lot better than that. So you don't have to pick sides and be either or anything. You just have to recognize that ideology of every man for himself will unleash entrepreneurial energy that will create a rising tide that carries all boats. Okay, so like I said, a couple 100 years ago, Yahoo. I mean, you know, but now we need something different. We need a different ethos.
Yes.
We need to take responsibility for the flow of capital.
Would you say that when you started your way in finance, you were more a believer of that? Like were you looking for something like that in the financial world? For some kind of an answer.
So the reason
the wrong that you were already seeing in the world, like what were you doing in the financial world?
Yeah, exactly. Well, you're a good person to ask that because you're translating one of my books, and then one of the reasons it's so hard is because of my use of language and the references and whatever are, let's just say, for the lack of a better term, on the poetic side of finance. They're not, you know, I'm pulling things together in a different way, and I'm not just using the word poetic because it's kind of a provocative, and I wish I was a poet, because I am a poet. No,
you are.
Get that out. Get that out of there. Get that out of there. But I'm answering your question. So when I was in college, this is a very personal answer. I don't know if anyone's ever even asked me this in all the hundreds of interviews I've done and everything. So this is from the heart, both because of you're in Israel and what you're going through, but also as I write my current book, which is a sequel to Call to Farms. It's called The Red Paper, and it's kind of an indirect response to Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper, which is what started blockchain. And guess what? Crazy coinkydink. They both that white paper came out the same year as my Slow Money book. Of course, I was totally unaware of that at the time, which happens to be the same year that Lehman Brothers collapsed. So make of that.
Yes, 2008.
2008.
What a year.
So actually, I can tie all this together. The first page of this, which is the book you referenced, just to show you that the thread has been there. In our search for answers to the great questions of our day, we would be well served to listen less to economists and more to philosophers, poets, ecologists, entrepreneurs, and farmers. Now, notice entrepreneurs are in there. I'm very much for entrepreneurs, but of a certain scale, of a certain kind, who have a broader, more holistic view of the world than just becoming the next unicorn or something. And I know I know I just threw a grenade into a bunch of financial people's living room, but that's
okay.
But that's not. I think we just have to acknowledge there are different kinds of entrepreneurship. You know,
yes.
It's not all one thing. So the reason poets were in that opening page of that book was because I was a poet when I was in college, and I was a promising poet. Let's just put it that way. At that time, everybody who knew me thought I was going to, just keep writing, and who knew what that meant. But I was, let's say, somewhere between concerned, confused, obsessed. So there we were 50 years ago, but I was feeling exactly the same way I feel now. I mean, I was a young man. I was 20, in my early 20s, and I just lived through the 60s and the first Earth Day and the landing on the moon, all these things. I mean, it can be a little hokey. That's fine with me, but it is also meaningful because that stuff happened, and we have no sense of history anymore. Talk about the shadow. I mean, I wish we had more of a shadow of history. That might help. That shadow might be good. We can't think past like the next news cycle, the next click, the next, day trading opportunity. Feeling that way in 1974 when a laptop computer wasn't even a daydream of a whatever, but sensing that we are on this exponential curve of growth and we're going to be powerless to stop it. I certainly didn't think poetry was going to be sufficient. So I didn't know what would be, but I'll be a little more specific, and I hope this is useful. When I gave a lot of talks about slow money in the US in the beginning, meaning about 15 years ago, I always referred to E.F. Schumacher's book, Small is Beautiful, which came out in 1973. So that was the year I graduated from college. And I don't think I read it in 1973. I probably found it a year or two later. But that book, I still think, is arguably one of the most seminal books ever written about sort of Western civilization and economics. And it's very simple to summarize it. And I'm going to do it now because it needs to be remembered and carried forward. E.F. Schumacher was a Rhodes Scholar, senior economist for the British Coal Board after World War II, so an industrial economist who later in life went to the Far East and kind of had his sort of epiphany that Western economics was out of sync with nature and spirituality. So he came back and he wrote a bunch of essays, and they turned into the book Small is Beautiful. And his basic tenets were very simple, but let's say profound, not call them very simple. They were profound. And one was that unlimited economic growth on a finite planet is impossible. Now, unlimited economic growth on a finite planet is impossible. Most economists still don't agree with that. Or not most, 99%, just to be clear. As many economists do not agree with that statement as scientists do believe in climate change. There's a funny one. I never thought that.
Same statistics.
Yeah, whatever. I deduced from the events of my adolescence and early adulthood, which I would say started with John F. Kennedy's assassination in 1963. I was 12 then. And that does to me mark what I think of as the beginning of my young adulthood. And then through everything that happened in the 60s, which I'm not going to make a litany of here, but I would wager that most people listening who are let's say younger than 50 years old would be flabbergasted if they actually researched what happened. Riots in the street, fires, National Guard shooting kids on college campuses, Civil Rights Act, Women's Lib, gay rights. It all happened in one decade. That isn't, and then the assassinations, multiple, important. Just imagine, however you feel about your political leaders, if several of them of all stripes got shot in the street within a 5-year period. You can't even process it because it was 1963 when it started, and nothing like that had ever even happened. So the idea that kind of violence could happen in the streets just was inconceivable. And then the backdrop of all that was nuclear proliferation. That was just the backdrop. I didn't mention Bay of Pigs. That was the beginning of that. So I'm just saying, I'm not trying to drag you through my life. You asked, so I'm answering the question.
I asked about your financial history.
So I was paying attention to all that, and that made me feel that if we were ever going to change directions, it was going to have to come sort of through New York and Wall Street and business, that the shadow of the invisible hand, the shadow of this thinking, which was carrying us forward, and we were starting to scramble faster and faster, was not going to bring us to the answer. And that, of course, we may never get to the answer. That's obvious. But I felt I wanted to do whatever I could, and I wasn't sure what that was. And so I bounced around a little bit, and then ended up in a startup company. The details don't matter, but I had my antenna up. I was trying to figure out, well, what's happening where I can maybe figure out something. And then it was very hard for a while because I had all these concerns, but I was in a startup company. It was a startup company. It was in the healthcare information. So it was actually a very, very, very early precursor to web stuff. But it had a social purpose to it, but I wasn't clear on how it was all going to fit together. And I just stuck to it. And that took me to a few different twists and turns. And then I found myself in a small venture capital fund, which I only stayed with long enough to learn what that was. And then I really went off on my path at quite a young age. I was probably 35 at that point, maybe 38. My track record wasn't obvious yet. Well, some people might think it's still not obvious. Depends on what your definition of obvious is.
Yes.
Let's say it's never been measured in the tens or hundreds or bits of millions or billions, but I was.
So I guess you can say that you put your hands in the water of venture capital for a moment. And
yeah, I'm sorry that took so long, but the reason it did is because you opened the door on the poetry thing, and I just wanted people to feel a little bit of the real soul searching that was going on, that I never stopped, but I just kind of stowed that away and said, okay, I'm going over here. I'm just going to go. Guess what? Like 30 years later, I was still over there. Because once you go in there, it's pretty hard to get out. But I've been at it for a long time, and I have started a bunch of little things along the way and run different organizations and been a foundation treasurer. So I did learn a lot about philanthropy and angel investing and community development finance, we call it in the US. And when I wrote the first book, Slow Money, it really was me. I was 55, 56 years old at that point. And I just was realizing, okay, whatever I know, it isn't nearly enough. Like, we're not doing anywhere near enough. And I'd been pushing hard
so
for
wait, what you were doing in the finance world is soul searching. So you were not the typical finance boy going into Wall Street to make money. You went there with like an agenda to make, like, how, maybe the question was, how does finance can make the world better? How can finance take us to a better place? While right now it doesn't look like it does. I mean, it still doesn't look like it does, but and you went there with this search and you couldn't find your answer. And so
I found very partial incremental answers. It's not like nobody cares. It's not like, a lot of people are banging their head on different parts of the problem. So I was on the board for a while of one of the first groups that was getting institutional pension funds to invest in more environmentally responsible ways. So that was that was early on. There were foundations that were trying to invest their money in a way which was consistent with their grant making program. Complicated. That's still an area of U.S. philanthropy that's very complicated, but going on.
But it was not good enough. Nothing was good enough.
And then there were groups of angel investors, sort of individual venture capital types, who were trying to do what they call triple bottom line investing. In other words, people, planet, and profits. And they had different systems for trying to measure that.
What's the problem with that, Woody? It sounds so great. It sounds really great. You were there. What's the problem?
How many hours?
Why is this not the answer? Tell me.
Because
why did you have to write the book?
Because no matter what anybody says, money always comes first. If you have triple
in this world.
Yeah.
In this world.
No, but if you say triple anything, it's not really triple. It's one of those, and then way down here there's a little.
Exactly.
And
that's what I find.
That's because the imperatives of capital markets are very, very, very strong. There's a certain ruthlessness to it. There's a seductiveness to it.
And there's also there's always the dividends, right? There's always the percentage that they have to make no matter what. So a little less percentage, or we will make this percentage of profit and we will give this and this dividends out of good things that we will do in the world. But we will have to give this money.
Just think about it for a second. Even if you're the best intentioned board of directors of the most beautiful fund on planet Earth, and your triple bottom line, how do you decide which of the social and environmental things to do, and how do you measure them? You get lost in the sea of just gobbledygook about measurement, because guess what? We all know that all the best things in life are priceless, right? That's stupid to say, but it's true. So
it's not stupid when people are seriously around boards meeting.
What's the value?
Seriously dealing with this question and trying to figure out a way to measure it in numbers. That's the problem.
At the macro level, what's the value of peace? Okay, we don't even have a thing for that. But we do know how much a Tomahawk missile costs, or how much a thing, or what it costs to rebuild a building after it's bombed. So like exactly. we know those numbers. So that's the problem. There's a basic, economics is good for certain things, for manufacturing things and etc.
And selling them.
Yeah, making, selling, consuming, growing an economy, creating jobs that pay people money, all those things. Those are not nothing that I just said in that list is bad, but in and of itself. In fact, they're all good in and of themselves. But if there's no outside governing force, which, by the way, Adam Smith assumed there was, he called it moral sentiments. So that's a whole thing. Again, any student of economics will be yawning when I say these things because they're very basic. But the social contract needs to subsume the economic contract, if you will, and it doesn't anymore. It's the other way around.
Exactly.
So it's that simple. So we kind of got, just think of it like we're in something and the weight got wrong and it got turned upside down, and now we can't turn it back the other way because the weight is all in the wrong place. But just to pull it together, when I wrote this book, I wasn't trying to start a movement called Slow Money. I mean, I had no clue what a movement was. And I was just trying to speak from the heart. And I realized when I was sharing with a few of my friends as I was writing it, that there was some juice there. People were responding. And I realized, okay, I'm not just talking about it. Like I got to do it now. But there is a little actual poetry in this book. No, people hardly ever talk about it, but there are some poems in there. But I was very tentative because I was kind of afraid to let that part of myself come forward too much. But I'm not afraid anymore. because
what happened?
Well, because now here we are in terms of the slow money movement. Let's change gears here. Roughly $100 million got invested in over 1,000 small organic farms and local food businesses in dozens of communities, mostly in the U.S.
In the U.S.
Mostly in the U.S., but some in Canada. A few deals got done in France. And there are a few kind of sparks here and there, but nothing started officially in any other countries. Until Shai Erev Levy, your beautiful compatriot, reached out to me about 2 years ago and said, I want to start something in Israel. And I'm Zooming with people in Uruguay on a regular basis now. And so we might be ready to see a little bit of international sparking here now. And so the basic idea of slow money was, if I say we must bring some of our money back down to earth. Okay, now that is not a financial statement, but it is a financial statement. It's not poetry, but it is poetry. It's a metaphor, but it's an actual statement. So when I first said that, I meant it as a metaphor, of course. I didn't mean like physically grabbing money and putting it in the earth, right? But then I found myself saying the following. And this is the spirit of this first book. As it zooms around the planet with ever accelerating speed, money is sucking oxygen out of the air, fertility out of the soil, and culture out of local communities. That's a mouthful. So I didn't mean that as a scientific or like description, okay? And then one day in the first year or two of this movement, I was having coffee with a retired investment banker, a very successful guy. And so I said the sentence to him. And then I made some comment like, well, I know I'm not really describing an actual, it's just meant to be. And he looked at me and said, no, that's actually what's happening. That's exactly what's happening. And I remember the energy of that because I was, oh my God, like I didn't even mean it as a completely serious, I meant it as a metaphor. And there's a guy coming out of what I would call the real trenches, like large scale institutional finance, saying, no, that's what's happening. So, sometimes, the expression, the truth is stranger than fiction. So, sometimes metaphor is truer than, formula or code or whatever. I mean, sometimes the only way to see what's going on is to kind of look a little bit off to the side and
Yeah.
and kind of allow a different light to shine on it or something.
Yeah.
And so I feel more personally empowered to push forward on this, whatever's left of my personal journey. But I mean, in terms of this reintegration of culture and finance in order to reshape finance, because that's what has to happen. Culture has to reshape finance. And to just keep trying to give us some new language for a new economic story. And that I know that when I say words like that, those are kind of simple and scary words, like a new economic story, new language. But again, slow money, those words didn't exist. The word nurture capital instead of venture capital. We don't need a lot.
And the thing is, you already have 15 years of those things happening in the real world. So can you give us like a sense of how is it happening, other than the big numbers of how many farms and how many dollars pass to so many farmers? Like, give us one story or one picture of something that is happening in the real world. And also tell me why 0% loan?
Okay,
Like, what is this about?
That's actually the same
Because
question.
people always say, but why 0%? They're still in this idea of let's do both. Why not both make money and make a good thing? And making
Okay,
money
so
is
that's the most painful part of this. Not painful isn't even the right
what's a
word.
good answer?
Well, I'm writing it now in the form of the red paper. But yes, of course, if you say 0%, you can't, what's the next sentence? Why 0%? Okay, now, to answer that, well, so now we have two questions, because you asked what's happening in the real world, then you asked about 0%. I was going to answer you with, well, there are 6 groups making 0% loans. I was going to tell you something about how that happened. So I think to carry this story, to make the story more continuous, I would just say that most of the money that got invested by slow money people around, when I say slow money people, there's no membership dues, there's no sign that says you're in slow money. It's just we were a bunch of people all talking to each other. We were meeting in person pre-COVID, both nationally and in lots of small local meetings. And all of those loans were below market. They were low interest loans, mostly in 3 to 5%, which at the time, if the same farmer was going to try to get a loan from a bank, let's say, where they probably wouldn't qualify anyway, it would have been 9%. No, these are highly subsidized, highly below market loans to people who probably wouldn't even qualify for a bank loan. And you're talking about, you asked for real world. Just think of scores of these, like farmers who needed a few $1,000s for drip irrigation, or a few $1,000s for a hoop house, or maybe $10,000 for a used truck or something. So it was very basic. These were mostly small, very small farmers. There was no rules about that, but by natural kind of momentum, it tended to be mostly small, very small farmers. And then because there were no one size fits all, when we would get together nationally, there'd be some larger things that would happen, a few $100,000 here, or in a few cases, a few $1 million. Those are the outliers, but they did happen. Because when you bring everyone together and they see the range of activities, some of them are on the more entrepreneurial investment, someone with a new agricultural tech, let's say, making like a software for a this one did not come through us, but I'm just giving an example. Software that will allow people who are grazing large numbers of cattle to know where they are without fencing them, or so-called invisible fencing for cows and things, other things. So we never did anything. That's more traditional venture capital. But if you work backwards from that, you could get to, let's say, a regional grain mill would be a good example. A grain mill that was specializing in only milling organic, artisan, heirloom grain varieties from a certain region, because the regional grain infrastructure in the US was completely decimated in the 20th century when everything got consolidated. So there's a good example. Those were the grain mills, and there were a few of them in the slow money thing. They did get money and they were successful, and they were somewhat larger deals. But by and large, you're talking about, a farm to table restaurant that's sourcing locally, a cheese shop, a 10 or 20 or 30 or 50 acre organic farm that's selling at the local farmers market. Maybe we'll talk about CSAs a little bit if you want to, community supported agriculture.
Exactly. The idea is that people are investing in the small producers, farmers that are around them. Like you said, in slow money and in call to farms, this is our time to invest in the things that we do know what they are and who are the people that are doing it, right? This is our time to get local and to invest in the things that are near us.
If you say, what's the answer to money zooming around the planet accelerating? And so that's very up here. Come down to the middle level. What does it mean? We end up giving our money to people we don't know for them to invest in things they don't fully understand, someplace where we never even know where that is. It's probably in a developing country or something. I mean, we don't know. And when I'm talking about we in the North. I'm by and large talking about the North, or the 10% or the 1% or the 0.1%, people who have the money class, people who have benefited from the economic growth of the 20th century and have to put their money somewhere, right?
Yeah.
So
many times it goes to the industrial, like the army industry and to war. And we don't want to know about it, and we would not know about it if we will not ask. And we're not asking because we just want to see our money grows.
Well, and it's not, yes, but because the alternatives are not, what's the alternative? And that's we're trying to create an alternative in slow money and say, well, it's not going to be an industrial alternative, meaning we're all about local, small, informal, whatever. So it's not going to be just click on your computer and you can do slow money until Bitcoin comes along. We'll get to that
next.
But
you need to put more of your time into this investment. It's not an automatic investment.
This is the whole thing. It takes much more time and energy. One of my favorite quotes made by someone who's not directly involved in finance at all, Oscar Wilde. And this is in my author's note in Call to Farm, so people will see it there. It says the whole trouble with socialism is it requires too many evening meetings. And then I say right after it, slow money is not socialism. It's a highly sociable form of capitalism. Okay, but to your point, yes, you have to be willing to go to a meeting. Now, the beauty of the slow food movement, which is obviously where I got the inspiration for the name Slow Money, is that it celebrates, just a simple act of breaking bread, to use a metaphor, right? I know it's both a metaphor and a non-metaphor. The actual act of breaking bread is profoundly beautiful. It actually is. I mean, anybody, okay, now I'm going to sound like a hippie. I wish my daughter.
Go ahead.
Well, so if you walk into the kitchen and someone is pulling a fresh loaf of bread out of the oven, I wish you didn't have to be a hippie to get excited about that, but maybe you do. So that is
unfortunately the lifestyle in which people invest in a click of a button is also a lifestyle of very fancy restaurants where you don't know where the food is coming from, and maybe the bread is very fresh, but you don't know who cooked it.
Of course not.
And in what conditions.
So ultra processed food is now a thing in the US, the way it hasn't been up to now. Another whole complicated story. But just think of ultra processed investments. Same thing. like it just goes through so many layers and so many institutional things and sliced and diced, and then this tranche goes over there and the other tranche goes that. Okay, that's how
And
you
then you get sickness, and then you get a financial like crisis like you had in 2008. And it's the
you
same thing when your body just breaks down from all this over
okay,
processing
so you
food,
don't need me to explain
over
it.
processed.
So yeah, um so why okay, so where are we? So we know everything. Okay, just look on the environmental side. Like we know there are microplastics showing up everywhere. Now, I haven't heard our president say
Who is
anything.
this?
I don't know. I can't remember his name. Um, say anything about the issue of microplastics. We know he doesn't believe in climate change, so let's assume he also doesn't believe in microplastics. However, I don't believe in microplastics. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say I believe in all the scientists who are studying microplastics, and I also believe in common sense. And as someone who might have worn one of the first Patagonia zip-up jackets ever made with a out of recycled bottles, so this was like 1972 or something. I said, cool, someone's going to do something with recycled plastic. Well, now, look at that, how beautifully intentioned that whole thing was, and it ends up being involved in microplastic. Like, who could imagine that a whole nother bad thing would come on the back end of that?
Yes, yes.
So we know what's going on, but so why can't we stop it? We can't stop it. It comes back to what you said a few minutes ago, where, well, we just want to make more money on our money. It's not because we want to, it's because we need to. Where like if you don't grow any of your own food, and you don't know how to fix a car, and you don't know how to fix a computer, and you don't know how to wire your home, and you don't know how to like give yourself an aortic stent, that's kind of extreme. Um, you know, you need money. Like we are in this existential state where we are completely dependent on our purchasing power for our survival.
Yeah.
Now, are we ever going to back off of that? No, not at that level, not the way I just stated it. Can we begin taking little acts to start seeding something else to create more balance in our lives? The reason I can say yes is because what we're doing at Slow Money. Now, do I need to say this? $100 million over 15 years in dozens of communities is nothing. Okay. It's a drop in the bucket. So it's not nothing. And it's also not a drop in the bucket. So some people would be screaming at me if they heard me say that, because it's a beautiful thing. Small is beautiful. And if you had been in any of those rooms where any of those relationships got forged and any of those things happened, you would know that the word beautiful means something. Okay. But the question is, how do we do more of it? Is there any pathway from this little beautiful thing that we've done and are doing towards a future where we could imagine hundreds or thousands of groups around the planet doing this, but to enough dollars, enough acres, enough carbon in the soil, enough local food, enough small businesses helped, and the experience of the people providing the capital of what it means to actually act in a mutual way with other people in your region to personally make a decision to give money where you can see it going. That is profound. And it would be horribly idealistic if I just started off saying that. I couldn't have even have said it 15 years ago, but if I could, it would have been dismissed as crazy. Now, I don't think a reasonable person can totally dismiss it because we're doing it, but the odds are daunting about how to do it enough. And this is where Slow Money Israel and Bitcoin, I mean, so my thinking evolved over the 15 years. If we are going to go slow more quickly, if you just want to hold that thing, that's what we need to have happen. How can we do that? We need a funding system that can over time build the capacity of local groups to do this. Now that I just made a little bit of a leap from where we were. Just hold that thought for a second. So we're going to need principles of circularity. We're going to need principles more permanence. Like how do we actually get the flow of capital to happen in a local area so that long term that local community can see the benefit, not just have a relatively affluent person from across the country come in and make a good loan to somebody and then go home. And that's a good thing. I mean, that's not a bad thing, obviously, but the best thing would be to create systems for the capital to recirculate locally where it can stay in the soil of the community, if you want to use the metaphor. Yeah. And the fertility of the soil of the community can get better over time. It would need to solve in a relatively clear fashion the question of how much money do we need to make doing this. In other words, what's a low interest loan? When we weren't doing 0%, people were just kind of floundering, 3%, 5%. How do you figure out what that is? Like, what do you charge, and who gets the returns? Well, if you don't,
0 is great.
If you don't have a clear answer to that, certain things happen. We are now clarifying that by going 0%, and I'll come back to that in a second. You would want the decision making to be as democratic as possible, meaning we don't want the imperatives of distant capital markets and old financial thinking telling us what to do. We want to decide what to do as concerned local citizens who want to help that farm. We see a different kind of risk if we minimize our financial risk, so-called, by sending our money into portfolios of distant securities. That's one thing. But the risk of our community falling apart is another thing. And we're all watching our communities fall apart. And that's not a risk, it's happening. Yeah. The culture out of local communities, okay? That culture is a loaded term because agriculture. So that's an important, Wendell Berry has written a lot about that.
I was waiting for this connection between culture and agriculture.
So if you want all of those things, if you know that, think of it as like creating a drip irrigation system on a farm versus putting a dam in a big major river. So, it's a small approach, targeted. We know it can work, but you have to do it. You have to work at a small scale and have appropriate technology and all things. We got to do the same thing with our money. So once you think about all that, you realize that just kind of stirring the pot nationally to get some money to go to some farms, while that's better than nothing, that's not the solution. The long-term solution is to create a system where money can trickle down into the soil of communities and recirculate permanently for a long period of time and gradually grow and build the community of people with the community of farmers and everything else. Okay. Again, sounds wildly idealistic when I even hear myself saying it, but we're doing it. There are now 6 groups making 0% loans, 5 in the US, and as you know, 1 in Israel. The ones, I will just describe the one in Boulder, Colorado. You asked for real world examples, and I want to give a very specific set of examples. Because I was living in Boulder for 10 years before I came to the East Coast to assume duty of grandpa. I'm allowed to smile when I say that, aren't I?
You are.
Okay. We got to take little things to smile when we get them. This idea of the 0% thing came to fruition while I was in Boulder, as I was watching all the slow money activity. And it took me 2 years of conversations with people in Boulder before I realized we were going to do it. Because I was a little, it was just because it's a nice idea maybe, but yeah, what? Who's going to get the people organized? And will people really do it? And why 0%? And now I'm going to tell you one quick anecdote, and then I'm going to give you the nuts and bolts of what's going on in Boulder, so that people can have a real tangible example. But in one of those early discussions with a farmer, we had lots of wine and cheeses and dinners and lunches and there was very robust conversations. No one was sure that I and we were really going to pull together a group of people to make 0% loans. But in one of the conversations, one of the leading organic farmers, this is someone who is farming hundreds of acres of land, and has a very established business and multi-level business in the Boulder community, kind of an anchor of the Boulder organic farming scene. And he said, I hate the idea of 0%. And I said, how come? He said, because I'm not a charity. My farm's a business. I don't want to be treated like a charity. I'm a business. And I pride myself on that. And we went back and forth. And at the end of the conversation, his name was Wyatt. Doesn't matter what I said. Wyatt, I have an idea. How about if we loan you the money, we don't specify an interest rate, and you decide how much interest you want to pay us. If you want to pay us back some interest, go ahead.
Nice.
And he thought about it, and we laughed, and we just let it go. That guy has now received 2 0% loans from the Boulder Group, and is a big enthusiastic participant. Now, after I tell you what's happening in Boulder, because I really do want to get to the specifics, then I want to talk more about the 0% thing, because that is such that 0% thing, there's so much energy to it, and it is so pivotal. So we'll come back to that. But I'm glad I started with that story of the farmer, because when it's in motion, it's very obvious what it is. So in Boulder, we rustled up, in our case, $100,000. That was from about 15 people. There was one larger chunk in there. I'm sorry, 2 larger chunks, and then the rest were smaller. And I just made up the number 100,000. You're not doing the same thing in Israel, but I'm just telling what we did in Boulder. Boulder's an affluent community. And I still had in my head, remember, we were just getting going, coming out of finance, even with a small F. Well, you got to have enough money to have a portfolio. You can't just like make one loan. So I thought, okay, if we have $100,000, we could make 10 $10,000 loans. And assuming a few of them become worthless, that we make mistakes, we'll still be in business like that, and everyone will see. So I just had that very simple thinking. It wasn't nothing fancy about it. So we did get the 100,000 raised, and then we started making loans. We probably made our first loan in Boulder in 2017, something like that. And today, the portfolio is just shy of $1 million. Around 40 loans, and we felt our way into making 4-year loans, mostly paid back at the end of the loan period. We don't get into those details. No interest, right? So for the first couple of years, there's no payments, and then a payment at the end of the second year, the end of the third year, and the end of the fourth year. We just kind of figured that out over time, and for a small loan, that works. You can do that for a small loan. So Boulder has 115 members right now. Since we started, probably 300 people have been members. In other words, some people don't pay every year. An individual membership is $250. Unless you're a farmer, you can join for $25. We want everybody who's a member to have some money in, right? Why does it matter? Because if you're a member, you get to vote. It's one member, one vote. So if you put $25 in, or $250, or $25,000, you get one vote, and you vote on 0% loans. In order to get a loan, a farmer or a food entrepreneur has to come into the room and talk to the members, and then they have to leave the room, and the members vote. Doesn't sound very efficient. It is not, but it is very beautiful. And I don't even want to make light of the word beautiful. It's more important than beautiful. Whatever's more important than beautiful.
Well, it depends what you think about the word beautiful. Once you understand beautiful is really important and disconnected from the modern context, it really is enough, this word.
What did John Keats say in the Ode to a Grecian Iron? Truth is beauty, beauty, truth. That is all you need to know and all you ever need to know. Something like that. That's a close quote. I didn't quite get it. Yeah. And it's easy to hear those words and kind of, oh, that sounds nice.
Truth. And Schumacher also wrote it about beauty and about truth and about morality, right? It's like very simple, very basic. What are you looking for? I also have it in front of me.
It's the section where I'm talking about Schumacher. And small is beautiful. Oh Lord, here we go. Okay. Beauty was good enough for the title of E.F. Schumacher's seminal work, and it should be good enough for us. He could have chosen small is appropriate, or small is good, or small is the key to health and happiness. He chose the word beautiful, however. His attention focused on issues of scale, nonviolence, self-sufficiency, and a meta-economic, that's his term, meta-economic understanding of man's place in the creation. The unrelenting exercise of the calculus of economics has facilitated the slide toward one-dimensional management decision-making, ugly commercial landscapes, horribly littered media spaces, and dumbed down public discourse. We have noted and debated with varying degrees of heat the death of God. Some have even noted what they've called the death of money, as currency shifted from gold to paper to bits of information. It is the death of beauty that concerns us here. If we are to rediscover meta-economics, then it will be found through a reaffirmation of the primacy of nonviolence and beauty. In all our actions, especially those that relate to the management of wealth and the making of the enterprises and the products that occupy and define so much of our waking hours, we must keep our attention on nonviolence and beauty. Products produced cheaply create ugly work lives and ugly households and ugly communities. Profits produced quickly cannot purchase patience and care. Patience is beautiful, restraint and care are beautiful, peace is beautiful, a small diversified organic farm is beautiful. There is nothing beautiful in the idea that we will only do no harm if we can, in so doing, make as much money as is generated in the doing of harm. Now that last sentence is the pivotal thing of the whole book. And it's a convoluted sentence on purpose, because you have to slow down to kind of wrap your head around. I just want to read it. Just let me read it one more time. There is nothing beautiful in the idea that we will only do no harm if we can, in so doing, make as much money as is generated in the doing of harm. Well, the leap from there to 0% is not very great intellectually or philosophically. That's not why I was reading that. But so, right, if you're able to understand that striving for peace, let's say, while you want to make the same kind of returns that you can make investing in war, that's not a thing.
But for a person like to first hear it, like you need to learn quite a bit to understand why. Can you, in a short answer, tell us still why 0% is the way to non-violence? In other words, 0% loan is the way to peace. It sounds like such a leap.
Well, if you say it that way, that's,
what's the connection, right? I mean, we are at war right now. We are under war of so many kinds right now. And you're telling me that the way I deal with money and the way I invest my money, and if I invest my money with 0% return in money, I'm making our way to peace.
Yeah, I was just looking for my second book, which I'm not going to try to find. It's over there somewhere.
From your head, Woody.
Yeah,
why?
no, I will.
0% is the way to peace.
So I'm going to. First of all, it's not that direct. I'm not saying go for 0% loans to peace. But if we want to have a vision of peaceable finance, of finance that makes small acts of peace happen between people, that I can talk about. Okay. So we have to open our hearts and our minds to the following notion. Economic growth and finance is all about extraction. It's all about taking something from the earth, making something, selling it, throwing it away, and monetizing all the different parts of that, okay? So it's fundamentally an economy of extraction and consumption, or extraction, manufacture, and consumption. And if we want to make space for a countervailing set of commercial activities to grow that are more about restoration and reconnection and healing, okay, I'd like to see that. Raise your hand if you want to see that.
Yes, please.
Okay. Well, then we need to imagine new flows of capital that are not based on extraction, manufacture, and consumption, but are based on restoration and mutuality and healing, whatever it was I just said. You can,
or in short, putting it back into the earth instead of taking it
thing
out of the earth,
Right.
right?
So everything has been about taking out, and now we got to be about putting back in. All right.
And if we're putting it back into the soil, maybe that's why we can't get returns in money, because we will get the return in fruits and in trees.
You're taking away my punchlines. I don't want you to explain it better than I do. That will get me, I'll be pissed. All right. So
it's just that we're getting closer to the end of our conversation. So I need to get some clear answers here, Woody.
So that is clear. You just gave a clear answer. If you really want to put back in and not take out, then you can't expect to make financial returns that go along with taking out. Okay. There's a lot of different ways to say it. Here's a way to say it a little more agriculturally. Synthetic fertilizer. In the US, it's NPK. I have no idea what it is in Hebrew, but synthetic fertilizer, ammonia nitrate,
NPK.
Okay. So what's that about? That's like steroids. It's like getting growth to happen fast by pumping a few key elements and chemicals into the soil that will foster, let's say, abnormally fast plant growth. Okay. What's compost? The opposite.
Slow.
Just organic, slow, natural decay processes. Much less fat, doesn't result in the same kind of spurts of growth, but it creates long-term fertility. All right. So think of a 0% loan as financial compost. That's one way to think about it. Now, why 0? Why not 1%? Okay. Because the difference between 1% and 0% is 100%. When you...
That's so beautiful.
I mean, that's how simple it is. When you are in a room with a farmer making a decision to make a loan, and you are going to make the money available 0%, it changes the entire meaning of the relationship. Okay, it's no longer about...
That's a relationship of trust.
It's no longer about the return to the shareholder or the capital provider. It's about the return to the community or the return to the soil.
Yes.
And if you really think about now, that's still pretty broad, philosophical. Let's be practical. A small farm is an impossible way to make a good living. It's hard as hell. A great farmer can barely eke out a living. Why? Because all of the headwinds of the industrial economic system that have consolidated everything, they all have gone in another direction. So for people who want cheap, shelf-stable food, that's what they're doing, or need that. So it's a very hard way to make a living. The last thing you want to do as a provider of capital is take any money out of that thing. It's crazy. You want to leave the money in and know that it's not only benefiting that farm family, but it is indirectly benefiting the whole community in a whole bunch of different ways. Beautiful. So why that strikes everyone as such a complicated... I think once you get there, you're going to... Yeah, it's obvious. I'll say it another way. It breaks my heart to see well-intentioned angel investors, meaning people in the top, let's say 1% or 0.1%, who want to be smart investors. And I'm just going to make somebody, a mythical person up here, someone who already has $17 million and 2 homes and
private
spends
jet.
A lot of, no, maybe not a private jet, not that wealthy, but thinks a lot about their money, and is going to conferences to do triple bottom line investing or regenerative investing or
impact investing.
Or impact investing is the new term. Okay. It breaks my heart to see people, this is me personally, to see people go through the struggle to use the old-fashioned investment methodology and wishing they could help a small farmer. It's just not a thing. Okay, here. Okay, let me try one more shot at the target here. I was speaking at a conference. It happened to be in Boulder. It was a national conference when I was living there. And I was on a panel. It was called Investing in Food Companies. And it was called the Regenerative Earth Summit. So it was all about, the Patagonias of the world and this and that. But, and this panel was about food companies. And at the end of the panel, we had to summarize our thoughts. And there were a couple of hundred investors and entrepreneurs in the audience. And I was kind of the elder. I'm not a hippie.
But you were there in the 60s.
But I was probably wearing Birkenstocks and had my shirt out. Say what you will. All right. So it got to me, and I was sitting next to a venture capitalist who I knew well, friends with him. And I had to say what I thought we had just talked about. I said, here's what I heard. We were talking around an issue. The issue is, if we want to treat farmers as if they are producers of commodities for corporate supply chains, and then we say we want to green that corporate supply chain. Okay, that's a thing. That's a thing. But if we want to treat farmers as growers of healthy food for a local community and tenders of the soil, that's another thing. Now, it's possible for a farmer to be both. It's theoretically possible, but practically almost impossible. And so I said, I'm interested in these farmers. I said, everybody in this room is interested in those farmers. And that's all right. I'm just telling you, but if anybody, well, let's go over there and talk. Of course, there's always a few people who are interested, which is good. So you have to, and that's again where the 0% comes in. If you want to be a mini financial institution or a mini venture capitalist, then you don't talk like we're talking. If you want to talk, like we want to help the community, we want to help the farmer. We know this is a tough way to make a living. We know we're talking about lots of small things. We know it's going to take time. We believe in the idea of financial compost instead of extractive, more exotic forms of finance. And then we can intuit beyond that it's all contributing to a new mentality of slowing our money down, allowing it. Now I'll introduce one other metaphor, allowing it to percolate into the soil instead of circulate endlessly up here, right? Right. Those are real things.
Yes.
And so my prayer is, which it's awfully hard again to say that word talking to somebody in Israel, is that let's say a generation from now, there'll be hundreds or thousands of these groups around the world, doing this a lot. Because
can you send a specific prayer to Israel?
No, no, I don't. That's not a laughing matter.
I need whatever. The situation is so dire. You don't have a prayer for us?
Well, we're all in it together. Without getting political, we're all in it together. I don't need to explain what that means. It's why I keep doing slow money. I mean, I'm 74. It's like I should just be writing poetry. But I think we should never underestimate. Margaret Mead's famous quote about never underestimating what a small group of people can do. That's been reiterated by many, many people. So I'm not going to go there exactly, but I'm going to kind of go there sort of in my own way and just say, I've seen what happens when small groups of people come together and do something different with their money. And it's the money. It's the act of taking some of your money and taking control of it and doing something with people that you're in a room, and something that you believe to be fundamentally good, and you don't need to monetize it. You don't need to have it measured by a third party and certified and packaged and everything else.
Or as you said in Call to Farms, you said that in the 21st century, we need to put some of our money and a lot of our intention and meaningful chunks of our time in a new kind of investing, putting money to work near where we live in things that we understand, starting with food, not with an eye towards how much money we might make, but towards how effectively we promote cultural, ecological, and economic diversity, community, resilience, health, and peace. Nice words, Woody.
So I was just going to do
I think this is a good direction.
What about a little call to farms to wrap things? I don't know if we're ready to wrap things up or not, but I think I should have
I think we're close to it. Yeah.
We should have a couple of words from call to farm. Well, you just
that was call to farms.
You picked yours. I'm going to pick mine. We are called to respond to immediate crises and to attenuate causes of future crises. This includes mitigating over-reliance on global supply chains. It also means actively working to restore mutuality and trust. From the international and national levels, down to the level of bioregion, community, neighborhood, and household. but not necessarily in that order. In response to military crisis, a few extraordinary souls may choose the difficult and complicated path of conscientious objection. In response to the collateral damage of globalization, the choice to become a conscientious investor is far less dramatic, far less binary, far friendlier. Driven, sure, by being mad as hell and not wanting to take it anymore, but at a deeper level, by a sense of conscientious affection. And I'll have a little more to say about conscientious affection in the red paper, but this is a nice way to come back to language, because of course, those two words, conscientious affection, had never, I came upon them in writing this book, just like I came upon slow money in writing this book. So we do need to find some new language and some new stories to tell ourselves, to give ourselves permission to do what we want to do deep down.
Absolutely.
But that the current professional and institutional industrial environment doesn't give us permission to do.
Yes.
So conscientious affection.
And doesn't give us the language.
Right. And so part of it is you have to be able to say it in order to be able to think it and do it. Obviously, it's not just about talk, it's about do. So, and we're all about the doing too. But my particular role is making sure I can figure out some of those, the storytelling part that will allow us more of our energy to flow in this direction. So wait, we're not quite done. We're not quite done. We're almost done.
There's one more thing.
Bitcoin, it's critical.
We have to say a few words, but Woody,
yeah,
this is like beyond.
I got it. Don't worry. You can edit this out if you need to.
A few words.
So in order to make it so, everything we just talked about, we also have to have a way for the millions of people who don't live anywhere near where one of these local groups is going to be and don't have $250 or $25,000 to chip in a little bit and be part of this movement, so that we can take that capital and get it to these local groups to help the local groups thrive and grow and start new groups. Okay.
And that's Bitcoin?
That's
like
Bitcoin.
Beet.
Bitcoin is beet, like the vegetable beet, B-E-E-T. It is a non-crypto, I call it the world's first non-crypto, non-currency, meaning it's the opposite of Bitcoin. So this is actually very important to my future effort in this, because as I said earlier, we need to go slow more quickly. We need to go local more collectively, and we need to go small in a much bigger way. All right. Now you can tell I've thought about that for a while, and that's what I've come up with, but it does capture the spirit of it. So can we use the internet to capture the interest from a broader community of people? Because we're trying to make money flow in a different way. And the flow is, if you imagine, let's say, the internet as being this broad, shallow pool of something, and then slow money being where it just drops down and then goes into the soil of the local groups, and it just stays in the soil and recirculates in perpetuity. It never comes back up. It just goes into the soil and stays in the soil. So it's all about putting in. It's not about taking out.
So you're actually about making this promise of capitalism that the money will trickle down eventually.
Oh, I hate you for saying that.
I hate also this way, but I hate when they say it, because it's not happening. But
so
actually,
funny.
slow money is about making this happen.
You know,
Don't you think?
I don't hate it. I love it. That's beautiful. I mean, I'm going to have to, that may have to make it into the red paper. I think it's going to have to go into the red paper. Yeah, because of course, that trickle down they're talking about is money trickling down from rich people to poor people, right? Here, we're literally talking about money trickling down into the soil. And so, and that money that's trickling down is not primarily coming from rich people, although it can. I mean, we certainly invite anybody who has more money to participate, but we want to enable lots of small people.
But it does trickle down from the economy.
Yes.
To the new economy, or the old. Actually, it's an old economy. It's the old economy, the economy of soil, like Satish Kumar is saying, right? Ecology is the economy.
Right.
And so we forgot this. And when we put the money down to the earth, economy finally returns to be ecology.
Yeah. Well, so hold that thought. So Bitcoin is just an online platform which we've spent a lot of time and energy crafting into this little brand, Bitcoin, because you only have a second or two online to get people's attention. We did a soft launch of it 2 years ago. We've done no marketing for it. We just wanted to kind of throw it out there and play with it for a while, and we have. And now we're launching Bitcoin 2.0 this fall. So stay tuned. And I'm trying to get as much of my red paper book done to be available for the launch as possible. It won't be done, but I'll have some of it that I can share, which will be everything we just talked about, but focused more on towards Bitcoin. Like, why do we need to have an international community of people? I do feel like the current world situation, and let's be a little more specific than that. Let's say Israel and the United States as two major players in the world situation. There are others, obviously, many others, but the cultural clashes that are going on in our two countries right now, the cultural divide is so raw and so deep, it sort of feels like it could never heal. And that's possible that it'll never heal. But I think it's more likely that it will heal eventually. And I'm basing that on history. But I mean, the United States survived its Civil War. And at the time, that didn't seem like any country could ever possibly survive that and come out the other side. I don't know if you know any of the stats from the Civil War. I was just looking at it the other day. In Gettysburg, in that one battle, 50,000 people died in the Civil War in a few days. That was the culmination, but still. So that's people from the same country. So things can heal, although we never completely healed. That's not. I'm showing that I'm not really an historian, but I think given the severity of all of that, okay, and none of that is overtly environmental in nature. None of that is overtly about climate change. None of it is overtly about microplastics. None of it is overtly about plastic and ultra processed food and toxics in the food chain and in our air and our water, about planned obsolescence or absentee ownership, or all of these different things that we've grown up with that were critical to fueling the growth of the economy and that are now creating so much collateral damage that they're turning into existential threats. And none of that's even on the radar and the stuff I started this little rant on, which is political and military and tribal and class and race based, right? It had nothing to do with the environment, but I believe it's all part of the same thing. It's all part of the systemic breakdown. We're all feeling the pressure of the systems are starting to break down. Like there's nowhere left to run, there's nowhere to hide. So it's like, so we're all going a little bit crazy. And so I think in that environment, putting in motion a few, or let's say I'm going to stick with planting seeds. I know it's a hackneyed at this point in our conversation, but it's what we're doing. Planting some seeds of a different way of being, of a different way of thinking.
Yes.
And in this case, they happen to be actual seeds, which is beautiful. That is beautiful. And I think it's that important. And it's like
yes.
my third book was called this, and I'm only showing it to you. Whoops, there it is.
Yeah.
Because it says
take trillions, real billions, Bitcoin, and the great American do-over.
Here, let me have some fun. I'm going to have some fun now. You can edit this out if you need to. Here's the end of this book. And right before towards the end, it says, imagination is to the mind what fertility is to the soil. Hold it. Don't even hold that thought. Just let it go. 10,000 years ago, Agriculture set us on the path towards urbanization, industrialization, and the geopolitics of nation states.
You also referenced that in Call to Farms. I liked it. And then you said, and now we are in the year 10,001. And it took me like a few readings to understand what? No, that's not the year. What?
I know. All right, we can
That
have a whole
was
discussion about how to count the years. Yeah, right. Okay,
one
so
of my favorite lines.
okay, so 10,000 years ago, agriculture set us on a path. 400 years ago, Europeans arrived on the shores of the New World and built the city of Providence. And when I wrote that, I didn't know I was going to move to Providence. That's a little footnote. Built the city of Providence, professing gratitude that the indigenous population was being wiped away, quote, as if by the hand of God, unquote. Boy, those words. It's like
Right now in Israel, they're talking about
I can barely go on after that.
a miracle, that we live in a miracle. It's the same thing. It's
Okay.
just
So that was, so we went 10,400. Let me just run through the rest of this. 250 years ago, our slave-holding founding fathers posited that all men are created equal. 100 years ago, so you can see where this is going, internal combustion and ammonium nitrate began conspiring to make Spam, TV dinners, Cocoa Puffs, Big Macs, and Twinkies. 50 years ago, millions of Americans marched in hundreds of cities and towns on the first Earth Day. 25 years ago, Timothy McVeigh detonated 4,800 pounds of ammonium nitrate outside the Oklahoma City Federal Building. 10 years ago, the words Deepwater Horizon and BP oil spill became synonymous with environmental disaster. 10 days ago, the Cameron Peak Fire, Colorado's largest ever, was 92% contained at 208,913 acres or 326 square miles. 10 minutes ago, the Dow Jones Industrial Average was 29,444.77. 10 minutes from now, someone is going to go to bitcoin.org and chip in $25.
nice.
10 years from now, I'm almost done. 10 years from now, Greta will be 27 years of age. Parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere will be, and what, pray tell, will be the percentage of soil organic carbon at Soul Fire Farm. This is a story as small as a small farm, as brief as a decade, and as ripple-inducing as inklings of the transition from Homo sapiens to homophilia, philia being the Greek word for brotherhood, friendship, whatever. So going from our sapiens.
Beautiful. This is so beautiful. Thank you,
So,
Woody.
so why I picked this up was because of the Great American Do-Over thing, and riffing on Israel and America. It's like we almost need a do-over, and of course we don't get a do-over, but we are going to have to
Seed the seeds.
pick the pieces up in some profoundly different way.
Yeah.
You know, so here's the prayer. You ask for a prayer, I'm going to give a prayer. That all the pain and suffering that we're going through actually will lead us out to someplace else.
Let it be. Thank you, Woody. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right.